So, good evening, Mayor Radis, council members, City Administrator Rogers, and the citizens of Summit who hopefully are viewing tonight. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to present this firehouse project. I know time's limited, so let me introduce Battalion Chief Paul Ndimba, who will get you up to date of what we've been doing for the last 4 years. And then after Paul's done, Chris KD from LeMay, Erickson, and Wilcox out of the beautiful state of Virginia, not as good as New Jersey, but pretty good, will actually do a PowerPoint presentation for our firehouse study. All right, so Paul? Chris?
In 2012, the department decided to look into replacing the current fire headquarters. The current headquarters was over 100 years old, and the last major addition was done in 1968. I have been involved with the project since that time because I was a new officer and I had the majority of my career still ahead of me, and the hope was I would be able to see the process through to completion. Early on, we realized we had no experience to fall back on. No one on the department had ever built a firehouse. I began traveling the country to attend conferences where I could learn the process of designing and building a new firehouse from the professionals that do it every day. I was also able to tour new fire stations and talk to the fire service personnel that have gone through the process and learn from them. The first step in our process was to determine if there was a need to replace the existing firehouse. The best way to do this was to have a needs assessment study done by an architectural firm with fire station design experience. We developed an RFQ for a professional firm to complete the survey and assist with the next phases of the project. The RFQ was distributed and received several proposals. The proposals were reviewed and the firms were interviewed. It was clear that LeMay, Erickson, and Wilcox Architects was the firm that we wanted to do the study. And in June of 2014, Council passed a resolution authorizing the needs assessment study. The first step of the study was to give the firm an overview of our department's operations, manpower and staffing, apparatus and equipment, and how the department responds to incidents were all discussed prior to taking a tour of the property and the building itself. During the tour, the architects made observations and assessments about the existing site conditions, building conditions, communication, and IT technologies. They looked at things like the lot size and accessibility, vehicle access and circulation, traffic, training features, life safety codes, ADA compliance, containment controls and decontamination containment, infrastructure, storage, the EOC, and their station alert system. A room-by-room analysis was done, and mechanical and electrical engineer reports were completed. LeMay, Erickson, and Wilcox delivered a detailed report on the needs assessment survey and provided recommendations for the city to consider. The report concluded that the current fire headquarters had multiple issues and inadequacies. The report highlighted issues with the site, the building, public and firefighter safety, and the building systems. The report gave a site evaluation rating score of 7 out of 32, or 22%. The building received an evaluation rating score 7 out of 58, or 12%. Both scores were well below current standards. Some of the major issues the study noted were the electrical system is maxed out. Most of the building systems are inefficient. Apparatus space was designed for smaller apparatus. The front apron's too small. There's not enough storage space. The current EOC is inadequate. The current headquarters does not meet current standards for gender equality, ADA, and several other issues. And it also cited the increasing maintenance needs and costs due to the age of the building. The report concluded that renovating and retrofitting the current building would prove to be cost prohibitive, would add time to the process, and would not deal with all the issues. Replacement of the existing fire headquarters was recommended. The needs assessment study report was presented to council along with a recommendation to replace the existing headquarters. The next step in the process would be a feasibility study. The feasibility study would be an evaluation of sites that the city determined were available as prospective sites for the new headquarters. In order to have little effect on the department's response times and standard of cover, the sites identified would need to be within a half-mile radius of the current location. The study would determine the amount of space needed for a new building and which sites could fit a building of that size. The study would also make a recommendation on which site would best suit the needs of the department and the community. In May of 2017, council passed a resolution to have the feasibility study completed by LeMay, Erickson, and Wilcox. The first step in the study was to identify available sites and have an evaluation of each site completed. Next, members of the department met with a team of architects, and an in-depth review of our operations was done. The review evaluated our current manpower, staffing, apparatus, and equipment. Anticipated future needs were also included in the evaluation. With this information, the team did a programming exercise which determined the square footage needed for each of the following areas: operations, administration, training, storage, living space, and the EOC. The total square footage needed was then calculated. Based on these figures, most of the sites were determined to be inadequate for a new headquarters. Conceptual design options were done by the architects, and a recommendation for a site selection was made as part of the study. The study has been completed, and a recommendation has been made. That brings us up to today. I'd like to introduce Christopher Keaty from LeMay, Erickson, and Wilcox Architects, who will present the results of the feasibility study.
Sir. Council President, Mayor, Council, it is such a pleasure to be back here. As Paul said, our relationship with Summit began almost 5 years ago when we met at one of those conferences. My partner Paul Erickson and I presented at many of those conferences. We've been working on fire station, public safety facilities for 30 years. It's one of our specialties. Engaging with the public safety community is an honor. It's something we take very seriously and doing our part to protect that community. And I'll touch on some of the key components as we climb into the design. As Paul mentioned, last time I was here, I was presenting that existing facility report, and we found many, many issues with that. Citing just very briefly from that report, the stated mission of the Summit Fire Department is to provide the highest level of protection and emergency services to the public. My report commended them on their efforts in doing that in a facility that is truly substandard compared to the facilities around the country. Some of the key issues: the lack of accessibility, the lack of gender balance throughout the facility, lack of storage space throughout so that things are piled up throughout the facility, all things that are just getting in the way of doing their job as well as they possibly could. So we are very excited to be through that process and now working into truly completing the vision of executing and realizing a new facility to assist them in the job that they're doing. So we're going to go through focusing here moving forward on these steps of the schematic design that we've been recently completed. Just a quick vicinity map view of the proposed station relative to where the existing headquarters currently is located. This was a key issue as we were discussing and evaluating sites. I know that the department had looked at this a good bit, but for response times being the key factor in consideration of where to locate a fire station, having it still within near to the center town base, but providing adequate access to the main thoroughfares to get to all across the city is certainly very important. So the new site over on Broad Street, just down to the parking lot, is about a third of a mile from the existing site. So all those response times would still be very central to where they need to be. Quick overlay showing the basic site plan configuration. One of the key components, and do I have any means of pointing with this? Maybe not?
Maybe not.
I'll stay here. One of the key considerations as we look at this site, my partner Paul Erickson refers to the necessary space for apparatus bays and the aprons on either side as an aircraft carrier. It's a very long linear space that largely dictates how you use your site. You have this length space that's typically 80 to 100 feet for the apparatus bays themselves, but then you have a large apron of concrete to the front and back that is upwards of 150 to 200 feet in this rectangle, which is very much what you see laid out here. It's why the building is rotated to allow that U-shape kind of configuration, the saddle that comes back out to Broad Street, with the main response coming out to the intersection. So that can be signaled, it can be controlled, particularly this intersection, knowing it allows both access east and west on Broad, but also directly into one of the residential neighborhoods, again with a heavy focus on response time. For both site design and the building design itself, that's a key consideration in everything we do, is minimizing the response times to get the firefighters out to do their important business. As we zoom in a little bit closer, see some of the other amenities on the site. We did take into account, having read the recent master plan work, understanding this end of Broad Street is very much going to be a gateway and entrance point to the city. So you'll see as we climb into the floor plans, that front corner towards the intersection has been developed, truly as a visionary entrance point as you come in along Broad Street. You'll also note we've have accurately dimensioned all of the vehicles that will be housed in the apparatus bays. Only one of those represents a future piece. There's a future EMS, future ambulance accounted for. All other of the 13 of those 14 pieces represented are current pieces that some have houses, or some are currently housed in the bays. Others are left out in the weather, or even their swift boat that they can't leave inflated because they have no place to park it. So in the need for it, they have to go inflate it before they can bring it to use. So one of the key components in developing the program was providing bays that can adequately store and protect all year round all the equipment that they have, and certainly anyone from the department can speak to the expense of each of those individual pieces that'll be housed in those bays and now protected. We are carrying over fueling stations as are provided in the current facility, and then the parking that's primarily there for the staffing for the facility. Looking a little more closer at the floor plan, one of the key issues my partner Paul Erickson has taken to heart and spent a lot of time researching and developing is what we call hot zone design. Firefighters are exposed to an amazing amount of chemicals and contaminants, fluids that are very dangerous. How we are able to provide a facility that allows them to come back, be decontaminated, and keep those contaminants in a controlled area of the building is highly important. So we want to separate those spaces, create clean spaces, and create important transition zones so they can come back from those events, be cleaned, and not carry that back into their own work or living spaces in the building, and even more so, not back into the community to their families and others. This facility, by its nature and the site availability, is going vertical. So what you'll see on the first floor are primarily the bay spaces for the vehicles and the bay support spaces. So places where they keep their protective gear, that key decontamination spaces, and shops and other things that are very much related to the bay activities. All of the administrative offices and housing or the bunk rooms are located up on the upper level of the building. We have, as you see kind of in the bottom right in the yellow, that is a special location to house the antique fire truck that they currently have, ideally with some glass and high visibility, again, to that kind of gateway corner of the building. Be a very nice little museum corner and that will be available through that front lobby. One of the key components we also look at is the visual control. So next to that same space is a watch room, which allows visual control of the entrance in the building, as well as visual control of the apron. Inevitably, somebody that doesn't know where they're going pulls up, parks their car right in front of the apron and the bay doors. You want to make sure you're aware of that, control it, and get them to go park where they should if they're coming to visit the fire station. We do have a mid-level. The bays themselves are just essentially double height spaces. We generally design those so that the cabs, which tilt forward, can be opened within the bay space in case there's any minor maintenance. They would be doing heavy work, but if they need to pop it open, the ceiling height allows that to happen within the bays. But that same height that the bays already require allows for mezzanines to each side. And one of the key components that was cited in the report, and we've talked a lot to the department about, is the importance and value of training incorporated into the station. They are there, it's a 24/7, 365 facility. The ability for them to occur or maintain training opportunities while they're in-house is highly valuable for what they do. So we've incorporated what you see to the kind of top and bottom of the bays are mezzanines on either side, where we can set up opportunities for training to occur. It can be as simple as ladder evolutions that come up, but again, it's fully enclosed. They can do it no matter what the weather. There could be 24 inches of snow outside. It could be 90 degrees in the summer. They have a place where they can get some training done in the course of the day, which is excellent. And the opportunity to have those mezzanines on both sides. One of the facilities that we've reviewed and talked with Paul and others about is our Charlottesville facility, where potentially we can even actually get some connections across, and you can do high ropes across from mezzanine to mezzanine. So lots of things that we can incorporate in a very inexpensive way within that space that's already provided by the base. Up to what's effectively the third level of the building, we have the administrative offices and the house, which is kind of the kitchen, day, dining, and bunk areas. It's one continuous fluid space, which is very valuable for interactions, but it's also fully separated. So the front side that faces the street, that faces Broad, is the administrative wing. This is a headquarters station, so we have more offices than what might be in a typical smaller fire station. So the chiefs, the officers, the education group all have dedicated office space that's fully closed off and separated. There are doors connecting the spaces, but they have their privacy, as do the day spaces for the firefighters. To the bottom right, you'll see the training room, which is going to double as, it'll have the infrastructure to be an emergency operations center. And EOC, we understand the current training room, which is, well, a classroom, while relatively small, is providing that function. This is a little bit better sized for both the training as well as that EOC function. And it'll have the infrastructure built in to allow that important function to be located here as well. And we had talked relative to the EOC program, the availability of showers and bunks and other things that can be accommodated as needed if any of the leaders that need to stay there overnight will be provided. Kind of moving north on the page to the kind of blue and green areas. That's the blue represent the bunk rooms. You'll see pairs and fours as a balance. We had talked a lot about how to best approach the changing gender balance through the firefighting community. We found that 2s and 4s allowed a great deal of flexibility while providing efficiency. So you still have 2s, the 4s, you can break down however you want. Often if there's a single, you may have that single opportunity, but as the gender balance in the department changes over the next 50 years, you have plenty of flexibility to allow for that. Likewise, the use of single-user toilets and showers affords that balance and to change over time. A great room to the front that has the kitchen and day dining spaces, an improved exercise facility adjacent to that with kind of those noisy functions all to one side, and then the bunks held back to the other. My partner Paul talks a good bit about the inside of the station belongs to the firefighters, the outside belongs to the community. And so we've focused here on the intentions of really how the building is going to flow and operate for the firefighters to allow them to do their work as well as possible. As we move to the outside, now we're starting to talk about what's going to be owned by the community and the city and how it's expressing the environment and the attitudes and the aesthetic that's appropriate for this community. We had a lot of conversations in developing this and what was the right balance of something that speaks to some of the traditional language that we see around the city with some of the brick and light stone, but also something that looks like it's going to be constructed in 2020. It's not trying to be historicist, but it's trying to be respectful of the community that you're in and what the right vernacular would be. So something that builds on some traditional language, but also has some use of glass and some modern materials and expression. So the top view is viewing kind of right from the intersection as you come into that area, but off of Broad Street. You can see the tall glass, the antique truck that's parked into that front corner. And to the bottom, first on the bottom left would be the easternmost apron looking at the bays, and then the rear kind of apron off is facing the garage to the bottom right. This view kind of gives a sense. One of the items I read in the master plan report and talked to others about was a sense of cityscape and how the building is set back appropriately, enough width for trees, but it's not set too far back. We have a lot of program to accommodate, so we did talk, and it's effectively the face of the building is close to alignment with where the face of that parking garage is. It's actually set back just a little bit more, so we have a little bit more space for some trees and potentially some benches along the way. You'll see here one of the important items we know that we had talked with the department about is the existing bell and finding a home for that. It's sitting over in the corner with a small memorial garden. Likewise, we found a place for that here at the front to create a little plaza center. So it's kind of a drive-through where the truck can come out when it's used for its ceremonial parades and such. But it's a nice little place for the flags and the bell to provide that little entrance kind of on that gateway side of the facility. And those are the key points. I'm happy to review any details of our process or any design thoughts, answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there's questions from folks. I want to, before we go to questions, I want to kind of give the context for the public as to why we're doing this right now and try to frame then the discussions. So 3 different items. One is, why are we looking at the fire station right now? Obviously, the battalion chief talked about how old the current building is. It's over 100 years old. We last had renovations in 1968, which is the year I was born, so that tells you. that's some time ago. So, but more importantly, we are going through a redevelopment looking at the Broad Street East, which includes the property where the current fire station, Broad Street West, which includes the property where the fire station currently resides. And among the questions that people always ask is, well, what's going to happen with the fire station? What's going to happen to the fire station? And so this is part of that entire process, thinking through what is going to happen, because we need a fire department, we need a fire station. How are we going to accomplish that, and what it should look like? And so this is not the first and only time we're going to be talking about this. There'll be many other occasions that we'll be talking and getting into the details about it, but it is part of that overall conversation for Broad Street West, what will happen to it. So that's putting that in the context. The second thing is, sometimes people ask us, well, why do we need our own independent fire department? And also, this obviously will have a large cost dollar associated with it. There's no doubt about that. And part of, again, going back to Broad Street redevelopment, part of the reason of how to finance this in our thinking would be to look at the monetary revenue that the city gets in the process of doing the Broad Street West redevelopment to offset the costs of doing this. So it's not purely going out there and taking out bonds to do it. So that has to be put in that context. But then answering the question of why we have a fire department that's an independent professional fire department, why do we have need for a fire? Because we have a city that has a Fortune 100 company that has 2 campuses on it. We have a city that has a major hospital with a helipad in it. We have a city that is a major state train station that has multiple lines coming into it, and we have a city that has it next to highways. Combined with the fact that what we're looking at is, and we have seen this already, a lot more multifamily use construction going on in the city. And we've had the fire chief come in and speak to us over time, talking about why fires have become much more dangerous for firefighters and the need to get there quickly. But it's not only that it's dangerous for firefighters, but they go faster, and so therefore more of the community is at danger. And so you can't wait for some fire departments from other places to come in and interest. So that's putting that in context. And finally, when we think about this building, we have to think backwards as well as forwards. And that is that we've had a building for 100 years. So what we're looking at building here is something that lasts for a very long period of time. And so we will take our time to think through it, but it also means, yeah, we have to invest a fair deal of money, but that is money that is going to be used, by this community for a really, really long period of time as well. So with that context, I'll open it up for questions that folks may have currently for right now. Anyone? Matt?
Well, thank you, Christopher. I spoke to you on the phone about it when you showed us originally, and I'm I'm a big fan of the design, and I just want to get up on a soapbox for a minute, and I'm sure that everyone up here feels the same, but our firefighters, they're out there day and night working for us, putting their lives on the line for us, and meanwhile, the station they're in is falling apart. It leaks when it rains. What you talked about with hot zone design certainly doesn't have, and certainly we want to make this space as safe and efficient for them and comfortable for them as possible. So, in my opinion, they need this new station right away. We need this new station as a community, and it's the least we can do for the people who put their lives on the line for us. It's not really, it's just a comment.
Thank you, Matt. Any other questions, comments? Mike?
Yeah, no, I know this has been a long process, and thank you for trekking all the way back up to lovely New Jersey from Virginia. And obviously, you guys have been doing a lot of work around this, which is great. I guess I just have a couple of conceptual questions to start with. One is, we've always talked about this, and we've got to put the firehouse somewhere. And I know there are a lot of restrictions on where that could be. As you pointed out, it has to be somewhere that they can respond to all different parts of Summit in an equal fashion. so that limits the opportunity to do so. But I guess my question is for people at home who aren't quite clear where this is this would be built on the commuter lot at the Summit train station. So just maybe, Michael, you can speak to this, because as David mentioned, we have a train station that services not just people in Summit, but people outside of Summit. And people would say, well, there are people outside of Summit, but New Jersey Transit invests in our train station because it is a commuter hub. So where would we put these parking spots?
Michael?
So there's certainly I think there's phases of this that we have to consider when, if we were to start construction on that site next month, which I'm sure they would love to see. But we have to find temporary locations for over 200 commuters that park in that every day, or during the weekday. And we are in conversations with some private property owners that could possibly accommodate that. It would require shuttling those commuters to the train station, but at least on a possible long-term, meaning more than a year basis, I think we could accommodate that. The question is, where would be the permanent relocation of that? I think there's a lot of different considerations we have, not only with Broad Street West, but also on the Broad Street East side. And we'll start that conversation, I think, soon enough with this governing body and the community about a possible long-term permanent structure or redevelopment of that particular area of the city. So I think there's a lot of moving pieces to this. I know we've had discussions around other parking lots that could be impacted by redevelopment. I think that's the puzzle we're trying to put together, and there's a short-term approach and solutions that we have to consider and achieve, but also long-term. And to answer about where a permanent relocation would be, Councilman, I don't have the answer to that at this moment. But on a temporary basis, and I mean over a 2-3 year period, I think we do have some options available. We're just starting those discussions with those property owners.
And has New Jersey Transit been brought into any of these discussions as of yet, or is it too early?
It's preliminary now. The answer is no.
Okay. Great, thank you. So just another question, and I know you probably don't have a specific number, but Council President Naidu talked about, this is an expensive undertaking, but just for the public's edification, round numbers, what are we talking about in this design?
We had a cost estimate as part of our schematic design package, so that was provided to the department, and actually I have a copy here, but I believe the number was, and it's an early number because it's not fully fleshed out design, but I believe it was 11.8 million was the initial schematic design estimate.
Great, thank you. Fantastic. And from a start to finish perspective, how long do you think it would take to put something like this in place?
So for where we are today, we're at schematic design, so we complete the design documents in roughly a year's time, maybe a little bit less, but roughly a year. And then about 16 to 18 months for construction is a reasonable time after that.
Okay, so you're talking maybe 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Marjorie?
Thank you for the presentation. This is very interesting. I was just wondering, have you looked into solar panels on the building, any kind of environmental efficiency, water conservation, things like that?
So we haven't looked into those specific things,
Uh-huh.
and in fact, that would be our next phase of work. So
Okay, so
schematic design focuses on kind of floor plans and the exterior look. Design development is where we climb into the systems with the building, so that gets into plumbing and electrical, and that's a lot where those elements are found. We have done a number of stations that are LEED certified from silver to gold to platinum. So it is very possible to do a very sustainable fire station. We actually have one in Fairfax County, Virginia right now that will be our first that is proceeding with a significant number of photovoltaic panels on the roof. at a the costs are finally coming down to a point where it's feasible. This is a project type because it is 24/7, so it actually makes a lot of sense for photovoltaics if we can find a way to make the numbers work, because it is using all the time. An office building, the window of time is narrowed, but here where it's a full-day facility all the time, it's a great use if we can do it.
It also doesn't have trees right on top of it the way some of our other buildings do.
Very true, yeah. So I think it's definitely something we're interested in exploring. There is an additional cost, certainly, to be balanced, but the payback period for PV, that recent station as mentioned, is down to 10 years, which is a great milestone to get to, because when it was 20 years, it was hard to make the dollars work, but as that's come down, we hope to see that happen.
Okay, thank you.
There are other options to some of your other points, water use, a lot of things that we incorporate as a basic sustainable effort that we would want to incorporate.
Right, which would also save money presumably in the operation of the building. Okay, thank you.
Mary?
You might have said it and I missed it, but what is the actual square footage of this?
It's about 32,000 square feet.
Thank you.
Anybody? No.
I just want to think it's a great presentation. Thank you. We've been talking about it for a long time, and I know our firefighters deserve it, and our community does as well. So hopefully we can put all the moving pieces together with parking and financing, and we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're very excited to be part of pushing this vision forward. Thank you.
Let me ask a question now. Off of Councilman McTiernan's question, did you look at another site? Or did you guys consider others?
So we were involved in the feasibility that looked at effectively 3 sites. There were 2 others. In fact, if I can go back a few slides. to the
Maybe you
front.
could just walk us through why those other 2 sites don't work.
So see to the red outlines on the 2 sites at the other end and the west end of Broad Street. Our understanding, and those were the 3 sites that were brought to our attention as they were city-owned or city-available sites, and that were within, again, the key is the response area. So these were in the right corridor for
Right.
consideration. I mentioned earlier that aircraft carrier description of what we need in terms of proper size and proportion for the bays and the apparatus bays. And you can quickly see the geometry of those other 2 sites. In fact, the one on the corner with that very acute angle was a non-starter. There was no way to lay out a station there, particularly with you have to be appropriately distanced from intersection, enters, and just for safety of vehicles exiting.
And just so that people who are watching or can't see this, that I think the property you're referring to is the parking lot that's behind the post office building, correct? No, which one are you talking
So
about?
so the first one was a non-starter. It was
Chestnut
at the, yes.
Corner of Broad and Morris.
Okay, okay.
So that one, just because of its geometry and the acute angle and its relation to the intersection, was effectively a non-starter. It just wasn't reasonable, to consider.
Okay.
The one that you just mentioned that's behind the post office, we did look very closely at, and unfortunately, just the proportions and the depth of the site weren't adequate for the bays and even a single apron. We had considered, as we were looking at, maybe it's either a back end only, which is not ideal, but we studied that, but there just was not depth even for the bays and a single apron to fit on the site. So it was very quickly, as we looked at the benefits of each site, quickly the other side of the east end was definitely the preferred and better site.
Anybody else? Okay. Anyone from the public have any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you for coming up. We appreciate
so
it.
much.
And we'll have a continued conversation, obviously.
Thank
Thank you.